Okay, right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. Let's begin with a Rashi. Rashi, Perek, Vov, Posuk, Zayin. So right near the beginning of the Parsha, the Posuk says, "Va'ani hineni mevi es hamabul mayim al haaretz." Hashem says, "I'm going to bring this mabul, this flood on the land. Shaches kol pasod, destroy everything. Asher bo ro'chaim, mitachas kol asher b'artiko. Everything is going to perish." Rashi says the following thing: "Hineni muchon lahaskim." Hashem says, I am prepared, I am ready to agree. Im osam shezirzuni v'amru lefonai kvar. They've already said in front of me. Mo enosh kisis karela. Pasuk in Tehillim. Hashem says there were those who already stirred me. So if you like, urged me, encouraged me, kavayochel, right, to destroy mankind. Mo enosh kisis karela. They said in front of me. They said, who is man that we should even mention, remember him, and everything else is possible to him. And Hashem says, now I am ready to agree with them. And firstly, let's understand where Rashi gets this from. You know, what does it mean? Where does Rashi take that from? Why does Rashi bring this medrash? The idea that Hashem is going to agree with those. They're referring to the Malachim. The Malachim had said already. It said to Hashem, listen, this mankind project is going nowhere. Right? It's got to stop. It's got to finish. It's only on the way down. You're going to have to destroy everyone. And Rashi, the Sifsei Chachomim says that Rashi, and just a simple explanation of Rashi, first of all, gets it from the fact that it says Va'ani hineni. That's the idea, right? So, in other words, Rashi had a question. There's two possible approaches brought in the Sifsei Chachomim. One is the word Va'ani. That's very strange. And I. What does it mean? And I. Va'ani. And I. And how can you say and I? Referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? How can you say Va'ani? And so the answer is because it's going on together with the statement. It's going on the back of, if you like, that statement of the Malachim. Hashem says, I'm now agreeing with what the Malachim said. Okay? That's one. The other one is the word Hineni. What's the word Hineni doing? Hineni. You find Hineni in reference to Avram Avinu and everyone else. Yeah. Hashem, where do you see a word Hineni? What does it mean, Hineni? So this again is a double lashon. Va'ani hineni, and I and behold me. And it's referring, there's something else going on in the background here. That's where Rashi gets it from. The Ramban has a very basic question on this. Just a few lines of Ramban. The Ramban says, quotes Rashi, it's a Medrash and Bereshis Rabbah. Va'ani teimo, says the Ramban. I find this astonishing. V'heach maskim imohem. How can it be that it can be described that Hashem is, quote unquote, agreeing with the Malachim through the actions of the Mabul? Right? He's leaving over a future for humanity. Noach and his sons will survive. Mankind will continue. The project will go on. There will be a future for mankind. Right? And through that, humanity will survive. And there'll be descendants as numerous as the sand. And therefore, how can it possibly be that there can be any comparison with what Malachim was saying, which was basically, forget this, stop the whole thing, right? Who can we remember that? And yet, saying that Hashem was somehow agreeing with that. And the Ramban himself says, it was in some way an agreement to their opinion through not having mercy on man. That's the Ramban finds Rashi's approach very difficult. He brings a possible, almost like a partial suggestion to resolve it. But basically, the question is left as it is. The Be'er Yosef has a very important, I say important because it provides us with a much broader perspective on what is actually going on here, pre and post Mabul. The Be'er Yosef, Yosef Salant, has a very, very important pshat. He says like this. He says that the claim, the concern, the criticism of the Malachim was not about the creation of man. Right? It wasn't about the fact of the creation of man. They were okay with the creation of man, right? The problem they had, he refers it to, was ofen brioso, was the manner in which Hashem created man. In the sense that when Hashem says, Nase Odom, what does it say? Last week's Parsha, V'yirdu b'degas hayom. They will subjugate everything. They will control. They will rule. V'yirdu. To be roida is almost like the greatest form of subjugation. Everything is under you. You are complete and utter control. This is the manifesto. This is the task of man. This is how Hashem sets out in Bereshis how mankind is meant to behave towards the rest of the world. And on that, says the Malachim said, why are you giving man so much? Look at the continuation of the Psukim in Tehillim. It's a quote from Tehillim Perek Ches. You're giving him such glory, such honor, such magnificence. He's the king in every way. You're putting everything under his feet. Everything, he's in charge of the whole thing. This, they said, that this is something which we find problematic. We find problematic. Why? The Malachim's claim was that through being in such a supreme position, things are going to go wrong. That's what their concern was. And what Hashem does now is effectively, again, it's all kaviyachol, talking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? It turns around to Malachim and says, on this I agree with you, right? The way the person to actually reduce man from this position of supreme control, as if everything entirely is under his jurisdiction. He says, what happens with the Dor HaMabul is that, and this explains a number of things. This explains why the world is punished with the Dor HaMabul, right? Everything, the creation, the animals that didn't themselves, they also, the way Chazal say, they were also busy not keeping to their own species, and they were also corrupting their ways. And there was even the Mabul itself not only erased the Balei Chaim, it also uprooted 3 Tefachim from the ground itself. The world, the universe itself suffers. Why? Because the whole idea was that because the actions of mankind had the ability to destroy and destruct the creation itself. Because since they were in that position of complete control, they were literally the Moshe over the whole of creation. So inevitably, the fact that they were acting in that position of a king to their servants, therefore, everything could be affected by their action. In reality, the way the Medrash describes it is that the ox would listen to the plow. It would actually do exactly what the animals and everything else would act before the Mabul, exactly as mankind wanted them to act. The man would say jump, and the shar would jump, and there would be no question of disagreeing, right? And that is why everything is swept along in the Mabul, and Kate's called Basar Barafonai, the destruction of everything, because the strength and the power of mankind is so great, and it's so all-encompassing of the whole of creation. Therefore, when he is messed up, when he ruins things, they're all ruined with him. And that's what happens. And therefore, says the Ber Yosef, what happens after the Mabul? What changes? What changes? Because he says it's very strange. If you just think about simple explanation of the Pesukim, what does the Torah say? I'm not going to curse the land anymore because of man. No, Hashem says no more, right? It's not going to happen anymore, right? And there's the bris that's made, the covenant that's made with the keshes, with the rainbow, that it will never happen again. Why? He says, it says a very simple question, right? If the reason is that if there transpires again, that they require destruction, right? Because of the sin, because of the chatoim or whatever of mankind, just as with the Mabul, how can Hashem forgive? Why should that be the case? Okay. And if it was the case that they should not receive this punishment because of what they've done wrong, so why did it happen this time? Something must have fundamentally changed for them to Hashem to promise never to bring it again. Says the Ber Yosef, Hadin din emes, whether the bringing of the Mabul or the withholding afterwards. Because after the Mabul, Hashem says to Noach, now the word rudir, to subjugate, to completely rule, is not present. Your fear, the fear of you, that will be present. All of creation will understand that you have a superior position. There's a natural fear in wild animals, generally speaking. Normally, they have a reticence to be close to human beings. There is a generalized fear of, that's the morachem v'chitchem yeh, the fear of you will be upon all of creation, but you don't have the ability to control them. The Medrash says the fear returns, but not the complete subjugation. And that is what happens afterwards. Now, I think the message here, we titled this year, the lessons that we learn from the descent, and as we'll come to the ascent of mankind as well. What is the message of the Ber Yosef's idea? That what mankind has to do now is respect the boundaries in creation. is understand that there are limits to our power. We have to develop this sense of humility. Before the Mabul, man is the supreme ruler. Creation bends, the world bends to mankind's will, even after the expulsion from Gan Eden, right? The shore is plowing. The animals, you tell the animals to jump, they jump. Maybe that's how you understand they came to the table. Just thinking of that now. Maybe that's how you understand how it was easy to gather them all in, because there was this complete control of the whole of creation. But after the Mabul, that doesn't happen anymore. Man has to learn that there are boundaries in this world. There are things that are within your control and there are things outside of your control. And I think that this approach helps us understand also, Rabbi Yosef doesn't discuss this as far as I know, but this is something else entirely, which is the nature of the punishment of the Mabul itself. Where's the midah keneged midah, right? What is the idea of the flood, right? Why specifically a flood? Actually brings, there are various, pshatim given as to what that is. The word Mabul, the way it destroys Bilbel Sakol, it destroys everything. Rashi brings this, right? So there are different ideas and different explanations given as to what this, as to how to understand this. The Kli Yakar says, this is kind of it's not exactly what the Kli Yakar goes, I think, a little bit in this direction. What happens with all the primary cardinal averos that the Dor HaMabul engage in? Yeah, you have Gezel, and you have the Aroyos, and you have Avodah Zarah, right? They have these three cardinal sins. If you think about it, all of them are about breaching boundaries. That's what they are, right? Avodah Zarah is this, like, the whole idea of the sense that you were created by Hashem. Said, I created you, and here you are thinking there's some power, there's some koach in these stones and rocks. You're breaking the whole boundaries of how everything is supposed to be. How I am the only one you should recognize. The extent of the Gilui Arayos, as the Medrash tells us, was horrific. Right, never seen before or since. The idea that anything went. It was complete corruption in terms of immorality. And of course, Gezel, the final thing that really commits the whole generation to destruction, right? The idea that everyone's property is up for grabs. There's a complete breach of boundaries in every way. The Kli Yakar says like this. In this bit, he says that why this is a beautiful idea. He says, what is the idea of rain? What is the idea of rain? Because he says, if you look at this, is based on Psukim and Eov, it's expounded on the Gemara expands this on this in Bava Basra. Rain is described as the way there's a pasuk in here which says Mi polag lashetef ta'ala. One of the things that Hashem says to Eov, when he says Eov has all these questions about why these things have happened to him and suffering that has transpired in the whole Sefer Eov, right? And he asks why. And one of the things Hashem says to him is, look at creation, look at the world around you, and try and understand. Are there things? Do you understand everything about this world? There's it's a beautiful parak Lamed Ches in Eov, where basically Hashem says, look at everything in creation and tell me if you understand anything. You understand nothing. And because you understand nothing in creation, you also can't understand my ways. One of the things Hashem says to him is, Mi polag lashetef ta'ala. Who divided for rain or a rainstorm a channel for each raindrop? The way rain falls is every drop falls in an individual separate place. That's how rain works. If you think about it, it's an incredible thing. It's descending from the clouds and it's falling as individual drops in each one is a separate drop. If you could slow it up, and you could look high enough, and you could discount the wind and the processes of the wind and everything else, you would see each drop falling individually independent, right? What happens during the Mabul? Those independent drops, right, turn into the opposite, a shetef mayim rabim, a complete waterfall of rain, of water, where all the drops get mixed up. They cross, all the boundaries cross. Everything gets mixed up into one massive flood of water. And the reason is because these are the words of the Kli Yakar. It's right. It's at the end of the first paragraph in Pasuk Yud Zayin. He says, "There's a hairbreadth between every drop of rain, so that nothing goes into each other's territory. Someone who steals and enters someone else's domain, someone else's tchum. What happens is that this rain of bracha turns into a mabul of floods. Ki oz kol hatipos misarven, because all the drips mix up. Everything gets wet. You cross the boundary and take someone else's property. The result is a mabul. So I think it links to this idea of the Be'er Yosef beautifully, because the whole idea of before the mabul is man thinks they are in complete control. And the lesson mankind has to learn, and what happens afterwards, is actually you do not have control. You're not able to bend all of creation to your will. You have to respect and understand how it works. And that's the lesson of the Mabul, the difference between the rain and what happens to rain, and how rain can become a Mabul. I'm going to move on to a different idea. Share with you a beautiful shot of Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz in the Keshes, in the rainbow. Perek Tes, Posuk Yedalad to Tes Vov. Let's look again at Rashi first. Rashi says, one second, Perek Tes, so is it Posuk Yedalad? Let me just find it. Which Rashi we're looking for? Yeah. So Rashi says, it's not here. Where is it? There we go. So, where is it? Yeah, the Hoyoban and the Onon, precisely. That's it. Yeah. Thank you very much. But I'm just thinking, that's right. Ban and the Onon, says Rashi, exactly. That's the one. Thank you. When it arises in my thought process, so to speak, to bring destruction to the world, then I will see the keshes, I will see the rainbow, and that will remind me, 1 second, I promise not to bring a mabul. Okay, so the question is obvious, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, does HaKadosh Baruch Hu need a keshes, need a rainbow to remind him of something? Yeah. Well, honestly, if I think I'm about to bring a mabul, all of a sudden I think of the keshes, and now I see the keshes, and now I see the rainbow, and I'm not going to bring a mabul. He needs a reminder. Yeah. Says Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz like this. Of course, he doesn't need a reminder. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to teach us a fundamental lesson here. A person is able to be mechazik, to strengthen a decision they have made, especially a decision made at a moment of greatest ororus, when you've been really sort of like fired up to do the right thing, to do a positive thing, in order to prevent that dissipating and drifting away and just losing all of that hislavus, right? All of that excitement, that enthusiasm for something good. How do you stop all that? Through making a sign. Through making a sign for oneself. That reminds a person of that inner moment of inspiration. And that's the message. It's not that Hashem needed the keshes. The message for all time is, this event has transpired. Hashem has said, I'm not going to bring a mabul anymore. I'm going to put a rainbow there. The whole discussion in the Rishonim, because of course the rainbow is a natural phenomena, so the various Rishonim understand that it was there before, but now it was designated in a different way, whatever. Little trailer for a shir I'm giving a shir this Shabbos Mincha is about whether you're allowed to look at a rainbow, some more about rainbows then. But anyway, leaving that aside. So the idea is not that Hashem needs a reminder, but we need that reminder. We need to know that when something happens, inspiration will disappear in a flash unless you do something at that moment to remind yourself. You set up a sign, an ois, right? So that you always remember, when I see that sign, that point, whether, that will always remind me about that moment of inspiration. I can always gain from it in future occasions as well. He brings a very powerful medrash in Bereshis Rabbah. He says there's the medrash in Bereshis Rabbah brings the story of a man called it's Bereshis Rabbah at the end of Perek Samach. I don't think it's such a well-known story. There's a man called Yochum Ish Tzroros. Yochum Ish Tzroros, the man of stones, who was, I think I'll see why he's called that in a minute. He was the Ben Achosos. He was the nephew of Rabbi Yosef ben Yoezer. And he was riding a horse on Shabbos, unfortunately, sadly, tragically. And at that time, they were taking Rabbi Yosef ben Yoezer to be killed at the same moment in time. So he's riding this horse, and Rabbi Yosef ben Yoezer is being persecuted, is being killed. Why? Because he kept Shabbos. He's being persecuted by the Romans, presumably, right, for keeping Shabbos. And this nephew of his is busy riding a horse on Shabbos, right? Busy riding a horse on Shabbos. And there's a dialogue that goes on between them. And this Yochum says to Rabbi Yossi, see the horse, right, that I'm busy riding on, basically, right? And see the horse that you're busy riding on or carrying. There was he was literally carrying the plank. It must have been a cross, basically, because they used to crucify their victims, the Romans, in many ways. And they were actually carrying this piece of wood that they were going to hang him on, right? And he says, look at me, I've got a horse and you've got a horse. There's a big difference between the two. Look who's winning, basically, right? And he says to him, and he basically, Rabbi Yossi responded to him and said, if the ones whom Hashem, who anger Hashem, they have this and they have this this consequence. How much more so how much more so for those who do the will of Hashem. In other words, if there are people who do the will of Hashem, they should be rewarded. And he says back to him, you're someone, you Rabbi Yossi, you spend your life honoring Hashem. And his sort of almost like pithy response to him is, if someone who's done the will of Hashem is suffering this much, how much is someone who's angering Hashem going to get? There's going to be something very serious waiting for you. He's effectively saying, because look at the way you behave, right? The Medrash then says something startling, because there's an immediate turnaround. It says, Nichnas by hadovar ke'eres shel achnoi. That those words of Rabbi Yossi entered him like the poison of a snake. Okay, and he went and actually fulfilled in himself. The tragic end. This yokum, the Dalad Misos based in 4 capital punishments. I think the Medrash actually describes the dramatic way in which he managed to fulfill all 4 skila, strafe, hereg, and chenek on himself. So it seems like he didn't survive them. And Rabbi Yossi ben Yoezer had a dream or a vision of some sort, and he saw the bed of this individual floating in the air, his nephew, and he says, "B'shor kala." In just a brief moment, Kidam Nizel Gan Eden. This one preceded me to Gan Eden, right? Why? Because he had a moment of his oros, one moment, and he acted on it. And he acted on that moment of spiritual awakening, and that changed everything. That changed his entire future. And that's the idea of the keshes, right? The sign that protects a moment of inspiration. That's what Chaim Shnevet says. One final idea I want to share with you is the progression from Nimrod to Avram. Talk about the descent of man. We need to talk about the ascent as well. How is Nimrod described? Perek Yud Pasuk Ches. Again, Noach is one of these parshas where we get to that far. If we get that far in, we're doing well. Nimrod is described as Gibor Tzayed. Yes, Gibor Tzayed. Perek Yud Pasuk Ches. A Gibor Tzayed Lifnei Hashem. Now, who are your Gibor Tzayed Lifnei Hashem? What does it mean, Gibor Tzayed? Says Rashi. He tricks people, he gets them to rebel against Hashem. Al Kain Omar, right? This is the pasuk. The pasuk finishes off and says, about this, therefore it shall be said, Nimrod Gibor Tzayed Lifnei Hashem, like Nimrod, who is a mighty warrior in front of Hashem. What does that mean? Therefore it shall be said. So Rashi says, I'll call Odom Marshia Ba'azus Ponim, about every person who is wicked, with a brazen face, Yoder Rebonim Miskaven Nimrod, who knows Hashem's existence and yet intends to rebel against him. Yeomar, it shall be said, Zek Nimrod Gibor Tzayed. This individual is like Nimrod, who's a Gibor Tzayed, who's a mighty warrior. Okay. So Ravol ben Ali Shur, in the second chelek of Ali Shur, says the following thing. Nimrod is described remarkably as someone who knows Hashem's existence. He knows who Hashem is. Yoder Rebbeinu. He knows exactly who it is. Same thing you find, he says, with the Anshe Stone. What does it say about Anshe Stone? Same words, right? It's effectively, so it doesn't say that, it doesn't say, if you go with Rashi there, it says, Roem v'chatoim lashem ma'od. Why lashem ma'od? They were wicked, they sinned to Hashem exceedingly. Chazal say, Yodim Rebbeinu, the same sort of phrase, they knew who Hashem was, umiskavnim limrod bo. And they knew, and they intended to rebel against him. Okay, so the question is, if they know what Hashem is, right? If they know what Hashem is, okay, then how can they intend specifically to rebel against him? What does it mean? You don't understand if they rebel, they don't know what Hashem is. They know Hashem's existence, and yet they rebel against him. Why? Why do they? How do these two things go together? He says like this: their knowledge that Hashem exists, what does it do? The knowledge alone, just the idea, it obligates a person. Creates a chiyuv. If you know Hashem exists, you're obligated. You're mechuyev in something. You're obligated to do something. Okay, you can no longer do anything you want in life. You now got to understand that life has boundaries and rules. I know Hashem exists, therefore I have to follow some rules in life. Problem is that going against that, of course, is everything the person wants to do, and all of the taivas and the kochas of the guf and everything else, and the bodily interest that we have and everything else that's going, it's countering that. If a person says revolve, if a person only has the knowledge of Hashem, just knowing Hashem's existence and nothing else, just that yediyah, okay? What happens is there is this battle. There is this battle between those taivas, those things that the body wants, always going against that. It's always bound. They're always countering, always fighting each other. And the only way that the body can overpower that knowledge that Hashem exists is to be miskaven limrod be'elokim atzmo, to intentionally rebel, chas v'shalom, against Hashem himself. And in this sense, the knowledge that Hashem exists, that causes the rebellion. Because that's the only way. If you keep the knowledge as a purely intellectual idea, there's nothing further than that, then the only pathway you have for the person, such a person, is to rebel, is to let their inner, desires and everything else effectively rebel against that. That's what happens if a person only has that knowledge. That's what happened to Sodom, that's what happened to Nimrod, okay? What happens with Avraham Avinu? So with Avraham Avinu, we find beautifully, there's a very famous medrash that says Avraham Avinu discovers, okay, the Rambam brings this at the beginning of Hilchos Avodah Zarah. Of course, this is relevant to the end of the Parsha when Avraham Avinu comes on the scene. And we have the medrash which describes how Avraham Avinu discovers at a very young age who Hashem is. There are two stages mentioned in Avraham Avinu's life. One is when he is weaned. That's the phrase of the Rambam. He was wondering what's going on. There must be someone controlling this, and he comes to a knowledge of Hashem. Then it says, the Rambam says, 40 years old, he recognizes Hashem. So Rav Wolbe says that actually what the Rambam is doing here is he's putting together two views in the Medrash, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, who disagree as to which age Avraham Avinu actually begins his pathway towards monotheism. When does he recognize Hashem in detail? And Rav Wolbe says what the Rambam does, and he says Rambam does this on a number of occasions as well, is he makes shalom between these two views, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. And he effectively says there were two stages to Avraham Avinu's journey. There was the first stage at a very young age, even the age of 3, where he knew of Hashem's existence. He knew. He looked at the sun, the moon, the stars. These didn't come from nothing. These clearly are not running the show. There must be Hashem who's controlling things. Later on, when he gets to Ben Arbroim Shana, I think there's a discussion about Menches Shana, whatever it is, he gets to a later stage. He then gets to a stage where he is Hikir Esbora. He recognizes his creator. And at that stage is what changes everything. Why? So Rav Wolbe does a beautiful thing. He says, if you look through Chazal, you find that wherever Chazal use the phrase Makir Esboro, recognizing his creator, it is always attached to something else. There's some action which follows it. For example, the Medrash says, say in the Shema, these words shall be in your heart. You should love Hashem. I don't know how to love Hashem. Therefore it says, because through that, you will recognize who created the world and you attach yourself to his ways. Similarly, you find elsewhere as well, the same phrase as well, it talks about the idea of if you learn Agadata, you come to recognize Hashem and attach yourself to his ways. Says Rav Wolbe, a person who recognizes Hashem not just has a yediyah, a knowledge that Hashem exists, but the highest stage of being makir esporo, recognizing Hashem, he always recognizes the kindness of Hashem and attaches to Hashem's ways. He says, Hakara she'enim or kinyan midas tovas, eina eladimion, recognizing Hashem that is not accompanied by midas tovas, by an action as a result, is imaginary. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. That's why Titain Emes Chesed LaAvram, we say. Chesed LaAvram. Where does all that chesed come from? Everything we learn about Avram, the whole story going forward, it comes because of the distinction between Avram Avinu and Nimrod. Because Nimrod knows who Hashem is, but that's all he knows. He has the intellectual knowledge. I know Hashem's existence, and therefore it's a constant battle. I'm fighting it. Avram Avinu is makir. He recognizes it's something totally different. A recognition that Hashem is in control, a recognition that my life depends on Hashem, a recognition of the relationship that we have. That creates action.
How do you compare Nimrod to today, like an academic?
We can say that there are many examples of the Nimrod mentality. In fact, it's been scientifically proven that the human mind, much more the mind, is actually hardwired to believe in something, right? There's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. It's very famous, right? Very famous line, right? We're hardwired in some way to believe in something, to have an intellectual knowledge of the existence of a creator. But that's the very basic stage. That's not what we're expected to build on that, to develop that. We leave that kernel. That kernel needs to be grown, needs to be developed, needs to be built upon. And that is what's going on here. That is the transition between Noach and Avram Avinu. It is the description. We put the two halves of the Shiur together. We have the descent of man. We have the the necessity for mankind to recognize, as the Ber Yosef says, right? The humility, you're not in control. You do not control everything. On the contrary, you have to recognize there are boundaries in creation. You're not in charge. Hashem is in charge, like the raindrops. Every rain falls in. Don't let it all become a mubble. Every raindrop has its own path, its own channel. Stay within your lane. Stay within what you are meant to do in this world. And then you have the ascent of man, because Nimrod starts with the Yodea, but that's nothing. On the contrary, that causes him to be Morid, that rebels. But Avram Avinu gets a Hakara, a recognition of Hashem, which leads to the positive action going forward in next week's Parsha.
Right.
Okay. Have a good Shabbos, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos.